Great. So, yeah, thanks so much for extending time. And I definitely it's been really interesting as we move forth from the Eco Faith retreat, where I feel like there was just like a lot of energy and a lot of momentum moving forward to switch into like an internal process of what does this look like? How can I take steps on this? And then also work in collaboration, which I think is really important in that, like, as we say in our eco faith prayer or beginning, like, we are not alone. We're not alone in this. We're not walking by ourselves. Um, but also, like, my internal process these past 4 months has been alone. And I felt like I was so ready to move forward, but also breathing into like, you need to develop your own personal story per se and what you're looking for and what you want before you can take those next steps. So I think in some ways it's been really a blessing to just reflect a little deeper. I was telling Solway earlier this week that it's been a really interesting time of like self exploration and then kind of also paired with like how does that walk hand in hand with eco faith's vision, how do those like fit together. So it's just been, yeah, just like a fun exploratory period. So I think like the couple questions that I've kind of tried to answer or like delve deeper into is just like what does an eco faith cohort look like, and who am I trying to attract? Like what kind of person am I trying to bring into this space? And then also like language, like what language feels comfortable, but also isn't limiting, in that like there needs to be a space where you guys would feel welcomed as well. um, and so what that kind of looks like. And then Allison brought up a really good question, and we were kind of discussing last week, but I wrote down her quote. We are all putting faith in a deeply unsustainable culture. But we kind of brought up this question of faith last year, and or sorry, not last year, last week. And I think a lot of people identify as spiritual but not religious. And then we kind of brought up that question of, if you're spiritual but not religious, where does the faith lie in that? And so I've kind of like wrestled with that question this week with like, where does my faith lie if those pieces are separate? So, kind of to start off, yeah, I guess just like, what does it look like? Um, I've kind of struggled with this in that, like, um, looking at, we have this space in like a virtual space. And I think that's really empowering in a lot of ways, in that, we're not stuck in traffic. It's, you're not taking half an hour to drive across the city to like come back. And I think that there's a lot of people that, I think you'd exclude a lot of people if there's a physical space. However, most of my friends don't live in Denver. I don't like have a huge community here. And as Robin and I were talking about earlier as well, um, you guys put on events and you guys can all come together at those events. And I don't have a space where I can say, oh, there's this event going on, like who else is going? Or do you want to meet up at this rally on Saturday? Or so I think in some ways that physical space is really needed, in that when you're organizing together, it's hard to organize if you're in different physical places. So, and then I mean, kind of to go along with that, like who am I trying to attract? Who are we trying to get into this sphere? But I think that really goes into the core of like, where do I belong? I'm a parent. I don't have really any friends that are parents as well. So I mean, that's definitely like a core of who I am, but also like that's not necessarily the space that like I feel comfortable in or belong to. In that like my primary like social group are not parents. But then also like can I identify or tap into some of these already like activism spheres that are present and certainly surround me. Um, and I think that's where like, you know, the doubt comes in of I heard a lot of you guys say like I'm a follower instead of a leader. And it's I think we all have leading capabilities in us, but those just show up in very different ways. And so what is my leading capability? And as like a member, or we're not officially members, but a part of a community that is primarily Black, is it my role to step in as a leader in that space? Or is it actually my role to just be a follower in that space? So it does feel like it's this kind of dance of wanting to lead and be a part of a community and a space, but also finding where that space is. So one of the questions or thoughts that Salve had, which I think is just such a perfect place to start, is just like connecting, like one-to-ones, like how are we finding more people to connect with? There's a bunch of leaders already in our neighborhood who's are the primarily the ones that have been disadvantaged continually over and over in the city. And they've been strong for decades. So yeah, just connecting and finding my space, I guess. I had a really intense meditation a few weeks ago where we were like imagining our birth, and it was like these like clouds, and then there was all these different like souls, I guess. I don't really know, but like they were all whispering together and talking about like what I should be. And they were like, she's going to be a quiet warrior. So I've been like thinking about that a lot in terms of what does that mean and what does that look like, um, to not like forcefully place yourself, but instead like quietly walk. Um, so yeah, I think Saul is exactly right in that one-to-ones, like how do we start there? But then also like the doubt of like, am I capable of doing that? Like I, you know, when I have a space where like my life is just in continual like fragmented pieces of that are shifting and moving, how do I make space in a way that feels enriching and not exhausting? Um, so so yeah, so moving forward that with that, breathing into the fact that I won't have space always, but also moving forward when I do feel like I have the space to do so. So moving with that, in terms of like visioning, language, what, you know, an ego faith meeting might look like. I I've been struggling between wanting to have a clear vision of like what would that circle look like what faces might be there, and also trying to be more open to sometimes I think when I get stuck on a singular vision, if it veers or if there's another opportunity that appears in a separate way, I'm more closed off because my vision is different. So trying to find a space where it feels open to possibilities, but also a clear vision of like what that community would look like. Um, and I think we've touched on this kind of extensively. But in terms of like the language piece for me, like I don't connect as strongly with, thinking of like a physical God or yeah, necessarily like praying to a God. And I think that it's not as simple as just like switching out the language for different words. For me, it almost is like a hierarchical structure of the language of having a God grant me something or give me something when I have that something in myself, but I have to take the effort to awaken it. Um, and whether that's through prayer or meditation, or, we all have different ways that we can awaken that within ourselves. But trying to find a language that empowers me to take the space to do that instead of hoping that it will be granted upon me or magically will show up one day or I will magically feel empowered to do something, rather than taking the steps to get there. So, and then also just that use of power, which we kind of explored as you guys did the mission statement, of giving power away to a God that can give me something, or giving my power to something that's going to make something happen, you know, knowing that God will make it okay rather than I will take the action steps to make it okay. So I've kind of struggled with how does that look, and also being inclusive of, to me, prayer is a different form of meditation. When you're praying, you're tapping into yourself and a higher power. And just because I name it something differently doesn't mean it's not as empowering to someone else. So what does that look like in terms of allowing space for everybody's diversity rather than granting my own thoughts onto something else? Um, so I think just to kind of wrap it all up, to touch on putting faith in our unsustainable culture. Um, I I think that this is unraveling. I think that we are unraveling our faithfulness to these systems, to these politicians, to these patriarchal structures, to these hierarchical structures. So, what does that mean in terms of where my faith lies? Um, my faith certainly doesn't lie with these old structures. My faith definitely doesn't lie with the idea that more the more money people have, the more they will do good things. My faith most certainly does not lie in belief that the government will do the right thing. But in terms of where my faith does lie, I think I still have a lot of questions. Maybe my faith lies in the belief that together in a community we can make things happen. Maybe that when we stop to connect with each other, good things happen. Maybe it's that when all is said and done, the earth will be okay. We might not. Or maybe my faith is just in goodness. So I don't know. I think that as I move forward, I'm hoping that I can find community in answering some of these questions.
Mhm.